The sun had long disappeared behind the jagged horizon when the transport trucks rolled through the chain link gates of Naval Special Warfare Training Command. Night fell heavy over the isolated California base, and the salt-tinged breeze carried the faint metallic smell of the nearby Pacific. From a distance, the compound looked like nothing more than a cluster of hangars in shadowy barracks. But to those who knew, this was no ordinary training facility. It was a crucible where reputations were either forged in steel or broken beyond repair. Inside the largest operations hall, a group of the military's most dangerous professionals gathered in restless silence. U.S. Navy SEALs, Marine Raiders, Army Rangers, and Air Force Special Tactics operators stood shoulder to shoulder, a sharp scent of sweat and gun oil clinging to their uniforms. Their faces, some scarred, some impossibly young, reflected years of deployments, and the hardened calm of people who had stared down life and death and returned to tell the tale. Tonight wasn't just another drill. It was a joint force simulation that blended every nightmare scenario into one impossible mission. A mock hostage rescue in rugged terrain under simulated enemy fire. The planners called it Operation Black Talon, but among the operators, it was known simply as the Gauntlet. Its reputation was brutal. Pilots had failed. Ground teams had been wiped out. Even the most decorated veterans approached it with wary respect. The massive steel door at the front of the hall slammed shut with a reverberating clang, pulling every eye to the raised platform. A figure emerged from the shadows, broad-shouldered, battle-worn, and unmistakably in command. Commander Brett Kincaid, a Navy SEAL captain with 3 combat deployments and a reputation for merciless standards, strode forward. His presence alone was enough to silence the low murmurs that had filled the room. His uniform bore no unnecessary decoration, just the subdued trident patch of a man who had nothing left to prove. "Listen up," Kincaid barked, his voice carrying over the hum of fluorescent lights. "Tonight's exercise is a full-spectrum simulation. No excuses. No second chances. This mission will test every skill you claim to own: air, ground, and everything in between. You fail here. You fail where it matters most. Out there." He jabbed a finger toward the hangar doors as if the enemy lurked just beyond them. The operators straightened instinctively. Some exchanged glances, their competitive instincts sparking. Others kept their eyes locked forward, unflinching. Kincaid's reputation preceded him. Stories of his brutal evaluations were whispered in every branch of the service. He didn't care about rank, and he didn't believe in hand-holding. You either performed or you didn't belong. For tonight's mission, he continued, pacing deliberately across the stage, our SEAL team will infiltrate a hostile compound, secure the package, and extract under simulated enemy fire. But there's a wrinkle. His gaze swept the room, sharp and assessing. We'll be running this exercise live with air support. We need a pilot, one with combat experience, nerves of steel, and the ability to stay invisible under pressure. This pilot will be responsible for infiltration, overwatch, and extraction. Failure is not an option. The announcement landed like a weight. A combat pilot? Here? In a room filled with ground operators, the requirement felt almost cruel. Pilots rarely participated in these joint drills, and those who did were typically brought in ahead of time, already assigned to the mission. This wasn't a planned selection. It was a challenge. Kincaid's eyes lingered on the crowd, waiting. "So," he said, his voice dropping into a low, deliberate growl, "are there any combat pilots in this room?" The hall fell into a thick, uncomfortable silence. Operators shifted their weight. Boots scraped softly against the polished concrete floor. A few heads turned, scanning the room as if anyone might volunteer. But no one moved. Combat pilots weren't supposed to be here. Most assumed one would be flown in or assigned from outside. The idea that someone among them possessed those skills seemed almost absurd. Kincaid's gaze sharpened. Nobody? He pressed. Not one of you claims the skill to fly a Black Hawk into enemy territory and bring a team back alive? His voice cut like a blade, daring someone to prove him wrong. The tension thickened. Somewhere near the back, a Marine shifted uncomfortably. A Ranger cleared his throat and quickly looked away. The operators weren't cowards. They were elite warriors, but the captain's challenge wasn't just about piloting. It was about owning the impossible under the scrutiny of the most unforgiving leader in the room. And then, almost imperceptibly, movement came from the far left corner. She had been there the entire time, seated slightly apart from the clusters of men. Captain Emily Hayes. Her flight jacket bore the subdued patch of the United States Air Force, but it was half hidden beneath the fold of her crossed arms. She'd remained silent through the briefing, her eyes focused, her posture calm. The flickering overhead lights caught the edge of her dark hair, pulled neatly into a regulation bun. Emily wasn't new to pressure. She'd flown combat sorties over hostile skies in Afghanistan, threading her aircraft through tracer fire and sandstorms alike. She had logged more flight hours under threat of enemy engagement than some of the operators had spent on the ground. But here, in this room brimming with testosterone and quiet rivalries, she was invisible until now. Slowly, deliberately, Emily uncrossed her arms and rose to her feet. The sound of her boots on the concrete floor was soft but startling in the silence. Heads turned, one after another, until all eyes locked on her. "I'm a combat pilot," she said evenly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried with a clarity that cut through the stagnant air. A few operators blinked, surprised. Others tilted their heads, skeptical. A Marine near the front smirked, whispering something to the man beside him. The reaction was subtle, but unmistakable, a flicker of disbelief that someone like her, a woman barely 5'7" and dressed in an unassuming flight suit, would claim such a role in this company of hardened men. Kincaid didn't move at first. His piercing blue eyes locked onto Emily's, weighing her words like a sniper calculating distance. "You're a combat pilot," he repeated, his tone flat, almost mocking. "What's your platform?" "HE-60 Pave Hawk," Emily replied without hesitation. "Special Operations Infiltration and Extraction." Kincaid's eyebrow lifted slightly. "Combat hours?" "Over 1,200. The room stirred. 1,200 combat hours was no small feat. That meant not just training flights, but real missions, hours spent in hostile airspace, dodging surface-to-air missiles and guiding troops through chaotic firestorms. "Close air support?" Kincaid pressed. "3 confirmed missions," Emily answered, her posture unyielding. "All successful." The SEAL captain's expression hardened, but there was a flicker, just a flicker of interest behind his eyes. He stepped closer to the edge of the platform, his boots echoing against the metal. "Ever flown under fire?" Emily held his gaze. "Twice, both successful extractions." A ripple of quiet murmurs moved through the room. The smirks faded. The disbelief wavered. Emily's voice held no bravado, no desperate need to impress. Her answers were crisp, factual, and unshaken. Kincaid studied her for a long moment, his silence more intimidating than any shout. Then, finally, he gave a single curt nod. "Step forward, Captain Hayes." Emily moved to the front, her footsteps measured, her chin high. As she passed through the sea of operators, she could feel their eyes on her, some curious, some grudgingly respectful, others still skeptical. She didn't mind. Respect wasn't given in rooms like this. It was earned in the air, under fire, where skill and nerve decided everything. When she reached the stage, Kincaid looked her over one final time, then turned to the assembled operators. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command, "meet your pilot, A charged silence followed. No applause. No cheers. Just the unmistakable hum of shifting perceptions as every man in the room recalibrated what they thought they knew about who could lead them into the fight. Emily met their stares without flinching. She didn't need their approval. Tonight, the sky and their survival would belong to her. Captain Emily Hayes stood beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the operations hall, the hum of the generators vibrating faintly through the polished concrete floor. The room packed with elite operators, whose reputations preceded them, seemed to tighten around her as she stepped forward. Conversations had stopped completely, leaving only the echo of her boots and the low mechanical buzz of the ventilation system. Every eye tracked her movement. To most in the room, Emily was still a stranger. Her arrival earlier that evening had gone largely unnoticed. She'd slipped into the back of the hall, wearing a standard-issue Air Force flight jacket and fatigued trousers, blending into the sea of uniforms. Only the subdued patch on her sleeve bearing the insignia of the HH-60 Pave Hawk community hinted at the world she came from. A world few here truly understood. The operators, for all their combat experience, were creatures of the ground. They lived in the mud, thrived on close-quarters chaos, and defined themselves by the weight of the gear on their backs. Pilots belonged to a different ecosystem, a high-altitude realm of calculation, patience, and split-second decision-making, where every movement was amplified by speed and physics. To these men, pilots were often abstract allies, distant voices on the radio, who came roaring in with firepower when things turned ugly. Having one stand before them, claiming not only to belong but to lead, was a disruption of their unspoken hierarchy. Emily felt the weight of their skepticism like static in the air. It wasn't new. From the first day she'd stepped into a military flight school, she had grown used to the sidelong glances, the quiet bets on how long she would last, the condescending remarks disguised as jokes. It's not hostility, she reminded herself. It's conditioning. The military wasn't designed for comfort. It was designed for proof. And proof, she had learned, only came through action. Commander Brett Kincaid, still standing on the platform, kept his piercing gaze locked on her. His arms remained folded across his chest, his posture relaxed but radiating quiet authority. "Captain Hayes," he said finally, his voice carrying through the silent hall, "you're volunteering for this mission?" "Yes, sir," Emily replied. Her tone was calm, controlled. She'd learned long ago that confidence didn't require volume. Kincaid tilted his head slightly. "You understand the parameters?" "Yes, sir." Full-spectrum simulation. Hostage rescue. Anti-aircraft defenses. Leave-fire conditions. His eyes narrowed, testing her. "And you believe you can fly a team of SEALs into a hot zone, maintain overwatch, and extract under enemy engagement?" Emily met his stare without flinching. "I don't believe it, sir." "I know it." The words landed like a well-placed round. A low murmur rippled through the operators, some surprised, some amused, others quietly impressed by the steel in her voice. Confidence was one thing. Conviction was another. Kincaid's lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "That's a bold statement, Captain." "It's not bold," Emily said evenly. "It's experience." A Marine near the front, his biceps straining against the sleeves of his camis, let out a quiet chuckle. "Experience? How many times you've flown into real fire, ma'am?" Emily turned her head slowly, meeting his skeptical gaze. "Twice," she said. "Both successful extractions. 0 casualties." The Marine's perk faltered. Around him, several operators exchanged looks. Flying under fire wasn't just a test of skill, it was a crucible of terror. Missiles didn't care about bravery. They only respected physics. Surviving even one mission under active fire required a level of nerve few would ever know. 2 successful missions was the resume of someone who not only had skill, but had faced chaos and beaten it. Kincaid broke the silence. "What platform?" "H-60 Pave Hawk," Emily replied. "Special Operations Infiltration and Extraction. I've logged 1,200 combat hours." That number drew another subtle ripple from the crowd. 1,200 hours wasn't training. It wasn't patrol flights over friendly skies. It was the sum of countless sorties into the unpredictable heart of danger night operations. Desert rescues, mountain insertions. Each hour represented not just technical proficiency, but a willingness to keep returning to the edge of death and coming back intact. Kincaid studied her for a long beat, his expression unreadable. He wasn't a man easily impressed. Yet something in her steady gaze and unshaken posture seemed to chip away at the doubt. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Step forward, Captain Hayes." Emily crossed the hall, weaving through the dense forest of operators. The space between her and the platform felt longer than it was, the weight of dozens of eyes pressing against her back. She sensed the subtle shift's boots scraping as men adjusted their stance, quiet breaths drawn in as they sized her up. Some looked curious, others resentful. A few offered the faintest nods of acknowledgement, the beginning of respect cautiously granted. As she ascended the 3 steps to the platform, she felt the subtle tremor of adrenaline in her fingertips, the kind she always got before a flight. It wasn't fear. It was focus sharpening to a point. Flying combat missions demanded total awareness of the machine, the weather, the enemy, and the people whose lives depended on her steadiness. Tonight was no different. The room might be filled with warriors, but she was stepping into the cockpit long before the helicopter left the ground. Kincaid met her at the top, standing close enough that she could smell the faint scent of gun oil clinging to his uniform. He spoke quietly now, his words meant only for her. "You know what's at stake here?" "Yes, sir. You fail," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "and this team fails. These men don't give second chances." "I don't need one," Emily replied. Kincaid studied her face for a beat, his eyes searching for any flicker of hesitation. He found none. With a short, decisive nod, he turned back to the crowd. "Operators," he said, his voice booming once more across the hall. "This is Captain Emily Hayes, United States Air Force. She will be your pilot for tonight's operation." The announcement landed like a silent detonation. No applause followed. This was not a room that clapped for introductions, but the energy shifted. Some men straightened unconsciously, recalibrating their mental calculations. Others narrowed their eyes, the gears of doubt still grinding. But beneath it all, a current of grudging respect began to form. Kincaid had made his choice, and no one in the room dared question the captain's judgment out loud. Emily stood at his side, her posture straight, her expression neutral. She didn't look for approval. Respect wasn't something she expected in advance. It was something she earned in the air, through precision, calm, and results. Her mind was already moving ahead, running through potential flight paths, considering weather patterns, mentally rehearsing emergency contingencies. As Kincaid began outlining the mission parameters' enemy positions, extraction points, contingency signals, Emily let the details burn into her memory. Every valley and ridge line became a mental waypoint. Every call sign, every time hack, every radio frequency etched itself into the mental map she carried like a second heartbeat. Around her, operators scribbled notes and whispered strategies, but Emily remained perfectly still, absorbing every variable. From the back of the room, the Marine who had challenged her earlier watched with a new expression, something between curiosity and caution. He leaned toward the ranger beside him and muttered under his breath, "She's not here to play." The ranger nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly, eyes never leaving Emily. "I think we're about to find out just how good she really is." Emily didn't hear them. Her focus had already narrowed to the mission ahead. In less than an hour, she would be inside the cockpit of a Black Hawk helicopter, guiding a team of America's most dangerous warriors into a simulated war zone. The stakes might be artificial, but the skill required was not. Lives would depend on her timing, her instincts, her ability to stay invisible in a sky designed to kill. And as the murmurs faded and Kincaid's voice filled the hall with final instructions, Captain Emily Hayes allowed herself a single private thought, a quiet, unshakable promise that steadied her heartbeat. They can doubt me now, but when the rotors turn, the sky will belong to me. The room seemed to shrink around Captain Emily Hayes as Commander Brett Kincaid finished the mission overview. Maps flickered across the digital screen behind him, valleys and ridgelines rendered in cold blue light. Symbols marked enemy emplacements and radar, arrays red triangles that pulsed like warning hearts. Operators shifted in their seats, leaning over notepads, memorizing call signs and radio frequencies. The hum of fluorescent lights mixed with the scratch of pens and the faint creak of tactical gear. Emily stood near the front, hands clasped behind her back, her expression calm. But she could feel the scrutiny like a physical force pressing against her shoulders. Every operator in the room was measuring her, weighing her credentials against their own unspoken expectations. The unspoken question, can she really do this, hung heavy in the air. Kincaid broke the tension with a sharp command. Questions for the pilot. Now's the time. Silence followed, but it wasn't the silence of respect. It was the silence of calculation, of men deciding how to test the newcomer. Then a deep voice rumbled from the far right. A Marine raider with a shaved head leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his chest. "Captain Hayes," he said, his tone carefully neutral, "these insertion points are tight, real tight. You planning on flying nap of the Earth in the dark, or you got some fancy Air Force trick we should know about?" The question drew a few quiet chuckles. Nap of the Earth flying skimming, just feet above ground level to avoid radar, was notoriously dangerous, even for seasoned pilots. Emily didn't hesitate. "We'll be flying terrain masking," she replied evenly. "Low altitude, radar avoidance, full blackout. No lights, no shortcuts. The Pave Hawk was built for this." The Marine raised an eyebrow, as if waiting for a hint of uncertainty. He found none. Before he could respond, another voice cut in, this one from a tall Army Ranger leaning forward with a predator's grin. "How's your crew coordination under stress? We've had pilots lock up when things go sideways. You freeze in that cockpit, and we're all dead." Emily met his gaze. "My crew has trained for simultaneous system failures in active combat zones. We don't freeze. We prioritize. You'll have constant comms, and you'll hear every maneuver before it happens. You'll know where I'm taking you before you see it." The Ranger smirked, but his grin soft, conceding the point. A third operator, a Navy SEAL with a scar tracing the side of his jaw, leaned forward, his voice low and skeptical. "You ever lost a bird, Captain?" The room quieted. Losing a helicopter wasn't just dangerous. It was the nightmare scenario every pilot carried like a shadow. Emily didn't flinch. "No losses," she said simply. "Not on my watch." The SEAL studied her for a long moment before leaning back without another word. The questions came faster after that. Flight hours, emergency protocols, electronic countermeasures. Each inquiry was a sharpened blade, designed to cut through pretense and expose weakness. Emily parried them all with crisp, unshaken answers. Inside, a steady rhythm pulsed through her mind, a quiet mantra she'd carried since her first solo flight. Breathe, assess, execute. Years of combat operations had forged a calm that no interrogation could fracture. She thought of the night in Kandahar when her crew had taken small arms fire on approach, and she threaded the pave hawk between two, burning buildings with just seconds to spare. She remembered the freezing blackness of a mountain rescue in Afghanistan, where sudden cross winds had threatened to slam the helicopter against a cliff face. Those missions weren't simulations. They were life or death, and she'd brought everyone home. Compared to those nights, this room of skeptical warriors was just another storm to fly through. Commander Kincaid, arms folded, watched the exchange with an inscrutable expression. He didn't interrupt, letting the operators test her. In his world, respect wasn't given by rank or reputation. It was earned through proof under pressure. Finally, after what felt like an hour, but was barely 10 minutes, the questions tapered off. The room settled into a tense quiet. Kincaid straightened. "Any more?" No one spoke. "Good," he said, stepping forward. "Then let's make something clear." His voice hardened, every word deliberate. "This mission is not a classroom exercise. It's designed to break you. Enemy contact is guaranteed. Terrain is unforgiving. Weather will turn against you. If you hesitate for even a second, you will fail. And failure in this room is a rehearsal for failure out there." He jabbed a finger toward the heavy steel doors, as if the real battlefield lay just beyond them. He turned to Emily. "Captain Hayes, you still confident you can get my team in and out?" "Yes, sir," she said, her voice steady. "I'll get you there and bring you back." Kincaid's eyes narrowed slightly, as if searching for the faintest flicker of doubt. Finding none, he gave a single, deliberate nod. "Then you're our pilot," he said. "Briefing concludes in 20. Gear up and report to Hangar 2. The operators began to rise, chairs scraping against the concrete floor. Conversation started again low, guarded exchanges as men reviewed maps and double-checked gear lists. Emily remained still for a moment, feeling the energy shift around her. The skepticism hadn't vanished. It had simply transformed into something more dangerous: expectation. They might still doubt her, but now they would judge her not just on her answers, but on her performance in the air. As she turned to leave the platform, she caught a flash of movement in her peripheral vision. The Marine raider who'd questioned her first stepped into her path, his expression unreadable. "You sound good on paper," he said quietly, keeping his voice low enough that only she could hear. "But paper doesn't mean a damn thing once the sky starts shooting back." Emily met his eyes. "Then you'll see for yourself," she said. "Stay close to the bird, and I'll get you home." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then the Marine gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod before stepping aside. Emily walked toward the exit, the sound of her boots echoing across the hall. Each step carried the weight of 100 eyes and the silent challenge they represented. She didn't need their approval now. She needed their trust when the blade started spinning. Outside, the night air was sharp and cool, carrying the distant scent of salt and jet fuel. Floodlights bathed the tarmac in harsh white, illuminating the dark silhouettes of helicopters parked in neat rows. The HH-60 Pave Hawk, assigned for the mission, waited among them, its matte black fuselage absorbing the light like a shadow made solid. Emily paused for a moment, taking in the machine that would soon carry them into the simulation. The Pave Hawk wasn't just metal and wiring to her. It was an extension of her own will. Every switch, every dial, every vibration of the rotor was as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. Behind her, footsteps approached. Commander Kincaid emerged from the doorway, his face lit by the glow of the floodlights. "You held your ground in there," he said, his tone neither approving nor dismissive, just an observation. Emily turned slightly, meeting his gaze. "I've had tougher audiences." A corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "They'll follow you if you earn it. Just remember, respect is airborne. It doesn't take off until the rotors do." "I'm ready," Emily said. Kincaid studied her for a moment longer, then gave a short nod. "We'll see." He turned and walked back toward the operations hall, leaving her alone with the dark silhouette of the pave hawk. Emily let the silence settle around her, the quiet before the storm. In a few hours, she would lift this bird into the night, threading it through canyons and radar nets, while a team of elite warriors trusted her with their lives. The doubts of the room no longer mattered. What mattered was the mission, the machine, and the calm certainty that had carried her through every impossible flight before. She rested a gloved hand on the cool metal of the helicopter's door and whispered to herself the promise she always made before a mission: bring them home. The night answered with the faintest echo of wind across the tarmac, like a quiet agreement between pilot and sky. The operations hall smelled faintly of jet fuel and coffee by the time the operators filed back inside. Maps glowed across the massive digital display at the front of the room, painting the walls in shades of cold blue and sharp red. Outside, the night had grown deeper ink black skies, broken only by the occasional flash of runway lights beyond the hangars. The hum of generators pulsed through the floor, a low vibration that settled into the bones of everyone present. Captain Emily Hayes stood near the briefing table, her gloved hands resting lightly on the edge. In less than an hour, she would be in the cockpit of an HH-60 Pave Hawk helicopter with the lives of the most dangerous warriors in the U.S. military in her hands. Her eyes swept the illuminated terrain displayed before her, a stretch of dense forest, jagged ridgelines, and narrow valleys that looked more like the unforgiving backcountry of Afghanistan than a California training zone. Commander Brett Kincaid strode into the room like a storm front. His presence drew the operators to attention before he even spoke. His eyes, sharp as rifle sights, scanned the room, lingering briefly on Emily before shifting to the maps. "All right, listen up," Kincaid barked. His voice cut through the hum of electronics and the rustle of papers. "This is the mission profile for Operation Black Talon. What you're about to attempt is a full-spectrum combat simulation. Enemy forces are entrenched, the terrain is hostile, and the extraction point is a nightmare even in daylight. You will have one objective: infiltrate, secure the hostage package, and exfiltrate before the enemy's response force arrives. Fail, and you'll know it, our enemy will hit you with everything short of live ordnance." He tapped a control on the console, and the map shifted, zooming in on a valley deep within the mock enemy territory. The red glow of simulated anti-aircraft emplacements blinked ominously along the ridgelines. "This," Kincaid said, pointing to a small clearing at the valley's heart, "is Objective Falcon. The hostage package will be located inside a fortified compound here. Intel indicates heavy patrols, electronic countermeasures, and simulated SAM sites along the approach." A low whistle came from one of the operators. The clearing was barely large enough to land a helicopter, and the surrounding terrain offered no easy ingress or egress. Kincaid continued without looking up. "Captain Hayes will insert the team at this LZ," he said, indicating a narrow strip of flat ground half a mile west of the compound. From there, the SEAL element will move on foot, reach the compound, and secure the package. Extraction will be from the same location. Estimated time on target, 25 minutes. Enemy QRF Quick Reaction Force will respond in 30. That gives you a 5-minute margin for error. Don't waste it." He turned to Emily. "Captain Hayes, walk them through the flight plan." Emily stepped forward, the subtle creak of her boots audible in the sudden silence. Dozens of eyes locked onto her, some still skeptical, others quietly curious. The digital map reflected off her visor as she pointed to the planned ingress route. "We'll be flying nap of the Earth along this riverbed to minimize radar exposure," she began, her voice calm and precise. "I'll maintain a low-altitude profile, no higher than 50 feet, until we reach this ridgeline. She traced the path with a gloved finger, highlighting the jagged terrain. From there, we'll shift to terrain masking through the eastern valley. Crosswinds are expected, but the Pavehawk can handle the load if we stay inside the tree line. Total flight time to LZ, 12 minutes. She shifted her attention to the glowing red triangles representing enemy SAM sites. Our biggest threat will be these two simulated anti-aircraft emplacements here and here. They're positioned to create overlapping fields of fire. If we trigger their radar, they'll light us up. We'll deploy electronic countermeasures, but our best defense is staying invisible. Keep chatter minimal until we're in the landing zone. The Marine raider who had questioned her earlier leaned forward, brow furrowed. What about contingencies? If we lose comms or you take a hit, what's our fallback? Emily tapped the secondary route, highlighted in yellow. If primary LZ is compromised, I'll divert to this secondary site 2 clicks south. It's rough terrain, but it's accessible. Emergency signal is 2 green strobes. If I'm forced to abort entirely, follow beacon Alpha 9 for ground extraction by QRF. Another operator, a ranger with a scar across his temple, raised a hand. Weather? Current forecasts show increasing crosswinds over the eastern valley, Emily said. Gusts up to 20 knots. It'll make the approach rough, but it's manageable. The real concern is visibility. We'll be flying blacked out, no lights, no HUD, NVGs only. If you're not used to total darkness, get used to it fast, the ranger grunted in acknowledgement. Emily continued, her tone as steady as her breathing. During exfil, we'll maintain a hot hover for no more than 30 seconds. That's your window to load. If you're late, we risk detection and simulated enemy engagement. I will not wait beyond 30 seconds unless ordered by Commander Kincaid. Kincaid gave a curt nod of approval. The room absorbed the details in heavy silence. Operators scribbled notes, committing altitudes, call signs, and contingencies to memory. The weight of the mission settled over them like a physical force. Kincaid finally broke the quiet. "Make no mistake," he said, his voice low but carrying. "This is not about passing or failing. This is about proving you can adapt when every variable turns against you. Captain Hayes will give you the ride you need, but she can't complete the mission for you. If you miss your time window, if you hesitate, if you fail to communicate, you're done. Understood?" A chorus of "Yes, sir," echoed across the hall. Kincaid turned back to Emily. "Captain, what's your risk assessment?" Emily met his gaze. "High," she said without hesitation, "but acceptable. The terrain is unforgiving, the weather unpredictable, and the enemy simulated but aggressive. Success depends on coordination and speed. If the team executes as planned, we can be in and out before the QRF mobilizes." Kincaid studied her for a long moment, then gave a single sharp nod. "Good." He faced the operators once more. "Gear up. Wheels up in 30. Hangar 2. Dismissed." Chairs scraped against the concrete as the operators rose, their movements purposeful. They moved toward the gear racks with quiet efficiency, strapping on body armor, checking weapons, and securing night vision goggles. The low murmur of tactical conversation filled the air call signs repeated, last-minute details confirmed. Emily stepped away from the briefing table and headed for the exit. The Marine raider intercepted her halfway, his expression no longer mocking but serious. "You sound squared away, Captain," he said. "Let's hope you fly as good as you brief." Emily met his eyes, her face unreadable. "You'll know soon enough." Outside, the night air wrapped around her like cool silk. Floodlights illuminated the hangars in stark white, casting long shadows across the tarmac. The Pavehawk waited at the far end of the strip, its matte black fuselage gleaming faintly under the lights. Ground crew swarmed around it, checking hydraulics, securing fuel lines, running diagnostics with quiet precision. Emily paused at the edge of the hangar, letting the sight settle into her bones. The helicopter looked alive even in stillness, the faint hum of its auxiliary power unit thrumming like a heartbeat. She walked toward it, the sound of her boots echoing against the concrete. Each step felt like the countdown to a storm she knew intimately, but never fully trusted. The Pave Hawk was more than a machine to her. It was a living partner, a creature of steel and rotor blades that demanded respect and rewarded calm. She ran a gloved hand along the cold metal of the fuselage, feeling the subtle vibration of the systems warming to life. In the distance, she could hear the operators approaching, their gear clinking softly in the dark. Soon, they would climb aboard, their lives entrusted to her skill and nerve. Some of them still doubted her. She knew. Doubt didn't bother her anymore. The only proof that mattered was the one written in the sky. And when the rotors began to spin, she intended to write it with absolute clarity. The hangar doors groaned as they rolled open, revealing a sky as dark as a sealed vault. Beyond the tarmac, the forested ridges loomed like sleeping giants, their outlines barely visible under a thin shroud of clouds. A gust of cold night air swept in, carrying the faint scent of pine and distant ocean salt. The temperature dropped sharply, as if the earth itself knew something extraordinary was about to unfold. The Pave Hawk crouched on the concrete like a predator at rest. Its matte black skin reflected the glow of sodium lights and scattered sparks of silver, each gleam hinting at the power coiled inside the machine. Ground crew members moved around it in coordinated silence, securing fuel lines, tightening straps, and running final diagnostics. Hydraulic systems hissed softly, exhaling the last breaths of preflight checks. Captain Emily Hayes approached the aircraft with steady strides, her helmet tucked under one arm. The SEAL operators followed behind her, their boots thudding in measured rhythm. They carried themselves like men accustomed to danger, yet tonight their eyes flicked repeatedly toward the woman who would pilot them through one of the most unforgiving flight profiles they had ever faced. Emily felt their gazes, but never slowed. Confidence, she knew, was not performed, it was demonstrated. The Pave Hawk was her domain, and in the air, her authority would be absolute. At the crew ladder, she paused for a final walk around. Her gloved hands traced the fuselage, checking for anything the ground team might have missed: a loose latch, a hint of hydraulic leak, a misplaced tie down. Satisfied, she climbed aboard and slid into the pilot's seat. The cockpit greeted her like an old friend, the faint hum of electronics, the glow of instrumentation screens, the familiar scent of machine oil and heated metal. Preflight complete. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant Jason Corbett, reported from the right seat. His eyes flicked toward her, the faintest trace of a grin under his visor. "Ready to dance?" "Always," Emily replied, voice calm. She strapped in, adjusted her harness, and began flipping switches with smooth, practiced motions. Battery power engaged with a quiet click. Hydraulic pressure climbed. The avionics suite came alive in a soft cascade of green and amber lights. Behind them, the SEALs filed into the cabin, securing weapons and strapping into harnesses. Their movements were efficient, but deliberate. Even seasoned operators grew silent when a night flight loomed over enemy-simulated territory. The cabin settled into a hush, broken only by the metallic clack of locking buckles and the faint hiss of oxygen systems. "Rotor clear," a crew chief called from the cabin door. Emily nodded and engaged the starter. The Pave Hawk's twin engines ignited, with a low growl that built into a deep, chest-thumping roar. The massive rotor blades above began to spin, slowly at first, then faster, slicing the night air into a rising storm. Dust and loose gravel skittered across the tarmac in a swirling halo as the helicopter shuddered to life. Inside her helmet, Emily's voice remained even. "All stations, this is Hawk 1. systems green across the board. Prepare for lift. The crew chief responded. Cabin secure. All operators strapped and locked. Emily eased the collective upward. The Pave Hawk responded like an extension of her own body, rising smoothly into a hover. The floodlit tarmac dropped away beneath them as the aircraft steadied in the air, the landing gear casting long shadows across the concrete. Through the cockpit glass, the world stretched into a sea of darkness. The forest canopy formed an endless black carpet below, broken only by faint ribbons of moonlit river. Far in the distance, storm clouds flickered with distant lightning, silent but ominous. Heading 165, Jason called, eyes on the navigation display. Copy, Emily replied. She nudged the cyclic forward, and the Pave Hawk slid into motion, gaining speed as it skimmed barely 50 feet above the treetops. The transition from hangar lights to pure darkness was instantaneous and absolute. Emily's night vision goggles painted the world in ghostly shades of green. Trees blurred past below like silent waves, their tops nearly close enough to brush the landing skids. Her eyes flicked constantly between terrain, instruments, and threat indicators, each movement precise and unhurried. In the cabin, the operators tightened their grips on seat straps. The sensation of speed without visual reference was disorienting, like riding a bullet through an endless void. Even seasoned warriors found their stomachs tightening as Emily kept the helicopter skimming low, banking sharply to follow the twisting riverbed. Jason's voice cut through the intercom. Cross winds picking up, gusting 20 knots from the northeast. Compensating, Emily replied. She adjusted the cyclic and collective in one fluid motion, tilting the aircraft against the wind's invisible shove. The Pave Hawk responded instantly, slicing through the turbulence with barely a shudder. A Marine raider leaned toward the cabin window, watching tree shadows streak past at impossible speed. Hell of a pilot, he muttered under his breath, though the intercom carried his words to everyone aboard. Emily heard but didn't react. Compliments were distractions, and distractions got people killed. Radar alerts flickered briefly on her display, a reminder of the simulated enemy radar sweeping the skies. Enemy SAM search pattern detected, Jason reported. Countermeasures armed, Emily said. Her thumb hovered over the flare release toggle, but she kept the aircraft steady, hugging the terrain so tightly that radar reflections remained minimal. Stay low, stay cold, she added, more to herself than anyone else. The Pave Hawk banked hard around a sharp bend in the river valley, rotor blades slicing the damp air with a soundless ferocity. Emily felt the aircraft respond with eager precision, the way a finely tuned instrument rewards a skilled musician. Every gust of wind, every subtle shift of lift, every flicker of electronic warning fed into the unbroken rhythm of her control. Jason gave a low whistle as they straightened out of the turn. You thread a needle like it's nothing, he said quietly. Emily allowed herself the smallest smile. Needles don't shoot back, she replied. The intercom crackled with Kincaid's voice from the command post. Hawk 1 status? En route, Emily reported. 8 minutes to LZ. Flying nap of the Earth, no detection. Copy. Maintain stealth profile. Enemy QRF activated ahead of schedule. Expect heavy engagement on exfil. Jason met her eyes across the cockpit. They're tightening the timeline. Emily's hands tightened slightly on the controls. Then we tighten ours. She pushed the cyclic forward, coaxing more speed from the engines. The Pave Hawk surged ahead, skimming so low that treetops blurred into a single dark smear. Every instinct screamed caution, but Emily trusted her training, her machine, and the unshakable calm that had carried her through combat zones more lethal than any simulation. Inside the cabin, the operators exchanged silent glances. The helicopter's aggressive maneuvers demanded absolute trust in the pilot. Every jolt of turbulence, every sudden bank reminded them how thin the margin for error was. And yet, Emily's voice remained steady over the intercom, calling altitude shifts and wind corrections with the precision of a surgeon. "Crossing Ridge 2, Jason reported. "Adjusting heading 180, Emily responded. Her hands moved almost imperceptibly on the controls, guiding the aircraft between two jagged ridgelines that rose like black knives on either side. The turbulence intensified, buffeting the Pave Hawk as crosswinds funneled through the narrow pass. The helicopter shuddered, metal creaking under stress. Jason's hand hovered near the emergency power lever, but Emily's expression never changed. She compensated with micro-adjustments, tiny, deliberate movements that kept the aircraft level, even as gusts threatened to flip it. When they cleared the pass, Jason exhaled audibly. "That was ugly. Not ugly enough," Emily replied. "We're still flying." The operators in the cabin exchanged looks of muted awe. Doubt, once sharp and unspoken, began to erode under the relentless demonstration of skill unfolding before their eyes. Far ahead, the landing zone came into view on the NVG display, a narrow strip of clearing carved into the forest floor. Emily studied it in silence, calculating approach vectors, crosswind angles, and escape routes with lightning speed. Every second counted. Every decision had to be perfect. She keyed the intercom. 2 minutes to LZ. Prepare for fast insertion. 30 seconds on the ground. No second chances. The SEALs answered with a unified, "Roger that." Emily steadied the Pave Hawk for final descent, her heartbeat steady despite the storm of variables ahead. In a few moments, the operators would leap into the darkness, and the true test would begin. But for now, the sky belonged to her, and she flew it like a promise no one would ever forget. The landing zone lay like a dark wound in the endless forest, barely 100 feet of uneven ground hemmed in by towering pines. From above, it looked impossibly small, a patch of black against deeper black. Captain Emily Hayes guided the Pave Hawk toward it with the precision of a sniper, every muscle attuned to the machine's subtle vibrations. The rotor wash tore through the clearing as she descended, whipping pine needles into a furious cyclone. The helicopter's skids hovered a few feet above the ground, blades shrieking against the crosswind. 30 seconds. Emily called over the intercom, her voice cutting through the chaos like a scalpel. The crew chief swung the side door open. Cold air blasted through the cabin as the SEAL team unbuckled and moved with lethal efficiency. Their boots struck the ground one after another, weapons at the ready, black silhouettes melting into darker shadows. Inside the cockpit, Emily kept her eyes locked on the instruments. Her left hand worked the collective, holding the helicopter in a perfect hover despite gusts that clawed at the rotors. Every second of exposure invited detection by the exercise's radar. "Enemy." "Team clear," the crew chief shouted. Emily didn't hesitate. She pulled power and climbed sharply, the Pave Hawk leaping skyward like a startled hawk. Below, the clearing vanished beneath the dense canopy. "Insertion complete," Jason reported, scanning his display. "Timers running. 25 minutes to exfil window." Emily banked away from the landing zone, staying low. "Copy. We'll hold pattern in Valley 2 until extraction call." The helicopter sliced through the night, following the twisting contours of a narrow ravine. The forest swallowed them whole. For several minutes, the only sounds were the rhythmic thump of rotors and the quiet exchanges between pilot and co-pilot as they monitored fuel, engine temperature, and radar sweeps. Then the first alarm screamed. A sharp electronic beep 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 filled the cockpit as the threat display lit up crimson. "Radar lock," Jason barked. "SAM Bravo just lit us up." Emily's heart rate spiked, but her voice stayed calm. Countermeasures armed. Breaking lock. She slammed the cyclic to the left and dropped the collective. The Pave Hawk rolled sharply, banking into a sudden dive that sent the valley walls spinning in the crew's night vision goggles. G-forces pressed them into their harnesses as the helicopter plunged toward the treetops. "Flares deploy," she ordered. Jason thumbed the release. Bright streaks of magnesium flared behind the aircraft, searing white against the black sky. The simulated missile's tracking system would interpret the heat as a target and detonate harmlessly. The cockpit filled with the smell of burning metal and the faint crackle of static. "Lock broken," Jason confirmed, eyes wide beneath his visor. But the reprieve was brief. Another alarm erupted higher, faster. "Multiple locks. Charlie and Delta sites are active." Emily's mind processed the data in milliseconds. 2 more simulated SAM sites had triangulated their position. If this were a real battlefield, enemy missiles would already be streaking toward them. "Hold on," she said, gripping the controls. She yanked the Pave Hawk into a hard right bank, skimming the valley wall so closely that branches scraped the skids. Sparks flashed against the fuselage as rotowash shredded the treetops. The helicopter shot forward like a black arrow, hugging the terrain to break radar line of sight. The SEAL operators in the cabin clung to their harnesses, eyes wide as the world outside blurred into a dizzying swirl of green and shadow. Even hardened warriors gritted their teeth as Emily forced the aircraft through maneuvers. Few pilots dared attempt in daylight, let alone in total darkness. Jason's voice cut through the intercom. "We've got simulated small arms fire ahead. Thermals picking up muzzle flashes on the ridge." Emily's HUD flared with tiny red dots, enemy gunfire simulated by infrared strobes. The exercise's controllers weren't holding back. "Suppressive pattern," Emily ordered. "Door gunners, light it up." The crew chief and right side gunner swung their M240 machine guns into action. Streams of blank tracer rounds tore into the night, each glowing arc a message of defiance. The simulated enemy returned with bursts of infrared flashes, marking their positions like fireflies of war. The Pave Hawk shuddered under the combined force of recoil and turbulence, but Emily kept it rock steady. She threaded the helicopter between 2 jagged ridgelines, her eyes scanning for every threat, every escape vector. "Lock again," Jason shouted. "SAM Site Delta." Emily's mind sharpened to a razor's edge. She dove the aircraft toward a narrow canyon, barely wide enough to contain their rotor span. The valley walls rose like black cliffs on either side, leaving no room for error. "Flares," she commanded. The sky behind them erupted in a cascade of burning magnesium. The cockpit glowed white for an instant before plunging back into shadow. "Lock broken," Jason reported, breathless. The crew chief leaned forward from the cabin door, eyes wide. "Ma'am, you're flying this bird like it owes you money." Emily allowed herself the faintest grin, her voice cool and measured. "It owes me survival." The alarms fell silent, leaving only the roar of rotors and the steady rush of wind through the canyon. Emily held the course, adjusting altitude by inches to avoid hidden ridges while keeping below radar range. Her breathing was steady, her focus absolute. For a brief moment, the world narrowed to the glow of her instruments and the thrum of the Pave Hawk's engines. The helicopter felt alive beneath her hands, an extension of her will, responding with the fluid grace of a predator. Jason broke the silence. "Teams checking in. Hostage secured. 15 minutes to exfil window." "Copy," Emily replied. She banked the aircraft slightly, aligning their position for a quick return to the landing zone. "Tell them we'll be waiting." The radio crackled again, Commander Kincaid's voice, sharp and urgent. "Hawk 1, enemy QRF accelerating. Expect heavy fire on extraction. Do not linger." "Roger that," Emily answered. "We'll make it fast." She adjusted power and brought the Pavehawk around in a sweeping arc, retracing their route through the valley. Her eyes scanned for threats, even as her mind calculated the fastest path back. The forest below looked deceptively peaceful, a rolling ocean of black treetops hiding simulated gunmen and electronic predators. Every shadow was a potential ambush. Every gust of wind a test of her control. Crosswinds increasing, Jason warned. Gusts up to 25. Compensating, Emily said. She countered the wind's push with a delicate adjustment of the cyclic, keeping the aircraft perfectly balanced. The machine responded as if it trusted her completely. Minutes stretched like hours as they raced back toward the landing zone. The operators in the cabin checked weapons and reloaded magazines, their faces set in grim determination. The mission wasn't over. The most dangerous moment extraction under fire was still ahead. Suddenly, another radar warning blared. Lock from Bravo side again. Jason snapped. They've re-engaged. Emily's eyes flicked to the threat display. The simulated enemy was relentless. Brace, she said. With a sudden pull of the collective, she launched the Pavehawk upward, climbing sharply before rolling into a steep dive. The maneuver forced the radar to constantly recalculate, buying precious seconds. She deployed flares in a staggered pattern, each burst of light painting the forest in ghostly brilliance. The helicopter leveled out just above the treetops, engines screaming in controlled fury. The radar lock faded, replaced by the welcome green of a clean sweep. Jason exhaled. Lock broken. Again. Emily gave a short nod, her eyes never leaving the terrain ahead. They'll keep trying, she said quietly. Let them. Far ahead, the landing zone emerged in the NVG's green glow, a fragile island of safety in a sea of danger. Emily tightened her grip on the controls. The SEAL team would soon call for pickup, and when they did, she would have to hover in that kill box while the enemy threw everything they had at her. The storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. The forest clearing reappeared on Emily Hayes's night vision display like a faint green scar on the earth. It looked no bigger than a postage stamp, and just as unforgiving barely enough space for the Pavehawks. Rotors to fit without slicing into the treetops. The ridgelines on either side funneled the wind like a hurricane corridor, gusts surging unpredictably through the narrow gap. Her breathing slowed. Every muscle in her body locked into the quiet readiness she'd honed over years of combat missions. This was the moment every briefing warned about, the exfil hover, the 30-second window when a pilot must stand perfectly still in midair while the world tries to kill them. SEAL team reports en route. Jason Corbett, her co-pilot, relayed from the right seat. His voice carried a controlled tension, the kind that acknowledged danger without giving it permission to win. ETA 5 minutes. Enemy QRF closing faster than expected. Emily adjusted her harness and rolled her shoulders once, loosening tension before it could become a liability. Copy, she said. Holding pattern at Ridge 2. We'll be ready. The Pavehawk circled just above the valley floor, its rotor blades a blurred halo against the starless sky. From this altitude, Emily could see the faint twinkle of the SEAL team's infrared strobes in the distance, tiny blinking signals of life, moving fast through the darkness. Contact, Jason said, his eyes on the threat display. Multiple radar locks, North Ridge. They're painting us early. Emily's jaw tightened. The exercise controllers weren't pulling any punches. Deploy decoys on my mark, she said calmly. Not yet. The Pavehawk banked sharply as Emily threaded it between two jagged ridgelines, using the terrain to mask their position. The rotors roared in protest as she forced the aircraft into a tight spiral that would keep them hidden until the SEALs arrived. Jason glanced sideways at her. They know we're coming. They always do, she replied. Her eyes never left the instruments. The radio cracked to life with Commander Kincaid's voice, urgent and clipped. Hawk 1, enemy QRF 2 minutes out. Be prepared for heavy engagement during extraction. Do not stay longer than 30 seconds. Acknowledge. Emily keyed her mic. Hawk 1 copies. 30 seconds or less. A burst of static followed, then silence. Jason checked his timer. Team's running hot. They need another minute. Emily's hands tightened around the cyclic. Then we give them a minute. She brought the Pave Hawk around for final approach, the clearing looming closer on the NVG feed. The helicopter vibrated as crosswinds slammed against the fuselage, threatening to shove it off course. Emily countered with delicate, deliberate inputs micro-adjustments, no larger than the twitch of a finger. The machine obeyed, leveling into a controlled descent. Altitude 50 feet, Jason called. Steady, Emily said. Her voice was so calm, it seemed to slow the very air. Door gunners, eyes open. Suppressive fire on my command. The crew chief acknowledged with a clipped Roger, his gloved hands resting on the M240 machine gun mounted at the side door. A new alarm shrieked across the cockpit, a radar lock from the North Ridge. Missile simulation active. Jason barked. They've got us painted. Emily didn't flinch. Countermeasures armed. Hold hover. The Pave Hawk eased into the clearing, rotors clawing at the air to maintain position. The ground below spun with dust and pine needles, turning the landing zone into a storm of flying debris. Through the open side door, the crew chief scanned the tree line with night vision goggles. No visual on team, he called. Still negative contact. Jason checked the timer. 30 seconds to exfil window. Emily's eyes darted between instruments and terrain. The helicopter bucked under another sudden gust. She corrected instantly, her left hand feathering the collective, her right adjusting the cyclic by millimeters. Flares ready, Jason said. Stand by, Emily replied. Her voice was low, almost serene. From the south, a sudden burst of infrared strobes flickered through the trees. The SEAL team, sprinting toward the landing zone. They moved like shadows, their forms barely discernible through the NVGs, but their intent was unmistakable. Get to the bird or die trying. Visual on team, the crew chief shouted. 10 seconds out. Door gunners, Emily commanded, suppress North Ridge. Keep it hot. Twin M240S erupted in synchronized thunder. Streams of blank tracer fire streaked into the darkness, glowing arcs cutting through the forest like comets. The simulated enemy answered with their own infrared muzzle flashes, flickering like fireflies of war. The Pave Hawk shuddered under the combined recoil and crosswinds, but Emily held it rock steady, her mind locked into a razor focus. Every gust, every alarm, every flicker of simulated fire fed into the precise dance of control. 5 seconds, Jason shouted. The first SEAL burst into the clearing, diving for the cabin door as the crew chief hauled him aboard. 2 more followed, their rifles flashing with simulated suppressive fire. Another radar alarm screamed. Missile lock, Jason yelled. SAM-Site Delta is active. Emily's thumb hovered over the flare release. Not yet, she whispered. The last SEAL appeared, dragging the mock hostage in a fireman's carry. 2 teammates laid down covering fire as they sprinted the final yards. 3 seconds. Jason's voice cut through the roar of gunfire. Go, go, go. The crew chief bellowed, yanking the final operator inside. Team aboard. Jason confirmed. Copy, Emily said. Her thumb slammed the flare release. A cascade of brilliant magnesium flares exploded into the sky, bathing the clearing in ghostly white light. The threat display blinked as the simulated missile lock broke. Hold tight, Emily warned. She shoved the collective upward and tilted the cyclic forward. The Pave Hawk leapt skyward like a predator freed from a trap, engines screaming against gravity's pull. The sudden ascent pinned the operators to their seats as the helicopter shot toward the ridgeline. Radar lock broken. Jason shouted, almost disbelieving. Not out yet, Emily replied. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned with focus. The threat display flared again, multiple locks from the North Ridge. The simulated enemy was firing everything they had. Flare stagger pattern, she ordered. Jason toggled the release. Flares streaked from the Pave Hawk in rapid succession, each burst painting the forest in blinding light. The helicopter weaved through the glowing chaos like a black phantom, dodging imaginary missiles with real skill. Cross winds howled through the canyon as Emily banked hard left, using the ridgeline for cover. The Pave Hawk skimmed so close to the trees that branches snapped beneath the rotowash. Clear of locks, Jason reported, relief flooding his tone. The crew chief turned from the door, his face pale behind his visor. That was insane. Emily allowed herself the faintest smile. That, she said, was necessary. Behind her, the SEAL operators exchanged glances. Their earlier skepticism had been burned away by the storm of skill they'd just witnessed. The woman they had quietly doubted had flown them through a gauntlet of fire with a precision none of them could deny. Jason checked his instruments. We're clear of the valley. Enemy QRF can't follow. Good, Emily said softly. Then let's take them home. The Pave Hawk leveled out as they left the kill zone behind. The forest fell away beneath them, replaced by open sky and the faint glow of the base on the horizon. The danger wasn't gone, pilots never truly relaxed until wheels touched ground, but the worst was over. Inside the cabin, silence replaced gunfire. The SEALs sat strapped to their harnesses, breathing hard, their faces reflecting the green glow of the NVGs. One of them finally broke the quiet with a low, incredulous laugh. Hell of a ride, he said, shaking his head. Best damn pilot I've ever seen. Another SEAL nodded in agreement, his voice still hoarse from shouting commands. I've flown combat extractions before. Nobody, and I mean nobody, flies like that. Emily kept her eyes on the horizon, her voice as even as ever. Job's not done until we're on the ground. Jason glanced at her, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. You realize you just made believers out of every skeptic back there, right? Emily allowed herself a small exhale. Good, she said. But that's not why we're here. Jason tilted his head. Then why? Emily's eyes stayed fixed on the distant glow of the base, her hands steady on the controls. Because getting them home, she said quietly, is the only thing that matters. The Pave Hawk roared into the night, leaving behind a valley littered with fading flares and simulated fire. The mission clock ticked down, but the hardest part, the part that proved everything, was already complete. The Pave Hawk touched down on the floodlit landing pad with a soft metallic groan, the rotors chopping the night air into heavy, rhythmic thunder. Dust and pine needles whirled into a shimmering halo around the aircraft before settling in a slow, drifting rain. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. Inside the cockpit, Captain Emily Hayes kept her eyes on the instrument panel, double-checking every gauge and dial, even though the mission was technically over. A pilot never celebrated before shutdown. Engine stable, Jason Corbett, her co-pilot, said at last, exhaling a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Copy, Emily replied, voice steady, hands moving with surgical precision as she powered down the systems. Her motions were smooth and deliberate, every switch flipped in a practiced sequence. Only when the final rotor blades slowed to a deep, lazy thump did she allow herself to lift the visor of her helmet. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the faint smell of pine and aviation fuel. Behind her, the SEAL operators unstrapped and rose to their feet. Moments ago, they'd been warriors locked in a simulation of chaos bullets, missile locks, and impossible wind currents. Now they stood in silence, the adrenaline draining from their bodies. A few exchanged looks, wordless acknowledgments of what had just happened. The skepticism that had filled the briefing room hours earlier was gone, burned away by the sheer skill they had witnessed. The cabin door slid open with a metallic clack. Commander Kincaid, the SEAL team leader, stepped out first, his boots hitting the tarmac with a deliberate thud. He turned back to offer a hand to the crew chief, then to the rest of his operators. Emily caught the movement in her peripheral vision, but remained focused on the shutdown checklist. Procedures first always. "Captain Hayes," Jason said quietly, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You know they're never going to look at you the same way again." Emily allowed herself the faintest smile. "Good," she said, still scanning the gauges. "But that's not why we fly." Jason shook his head, chuckling under his breath. "You and your answers. Always straight out of a flight manual." Emily gave no reply. Her eyes remained on the glowing instruments until the last engine light blinked to black. Only then did she unclip her harness and rise from the seat. The muscles in her shoulders protested, the physical reminder of an hour spent wrestling a 12-ton machine through hostile winds. She rolled them once, pushing the tension away. Outside, the landing pad buzzed with activity. Ground crew members in reflective vests hustled toward the aircraft, their flashlights slicing through the night. But even they seemed to move a little slower, their eyes drawn not to the helicopter itself, but to the woman stepping down from its cockpit. Emily descended the metal steps with the same controlled precision she'd shown in flight. Her boots hit the concrete, the impact sharp and grounding. Around her, conversations died mid-sentence. A few operators straightened instinctively, like soldiers in the presence of a superior officer. The SEAL captain, Commander Rourke, the man who had posed the question hours ago, strode across the tarmac. His broad shoulders and weathered face carried the authority of someone who had seen more real combat than most men dared imagine. The hard lines around his eyes betrayed neither approval nor criticism. He stopped a few feet away, boots planted firmly, and studied her for a long, deliberate moment. Emily stood at attention, helmet tucked under her arm, posture relaxed but unmistakably professional. The swirling night wind tugged at a loose strand of hair, but she made no move to brush it away. Finally, Rourke broke the silence. "Outstanding work, Captain Hayes." His voice carried the deep gravel of a man used to commanding rooms and surviving firefights. That extraction was textbook perfection. "Thank you, sir," Emily replied evenly. Rourke's eyes narrowed slightly, as if weighing his next words. "I've flown with a lot of pilots. Few would have attempted that hover. Fewer still would have pulled it off." He paused, the faintest hint of a smile breaking the iron mask of his expression. "You made believers out of my entire team tonight." The SEAL operators behind him nodded almost in unison. One of them, a broad-shouldered petty officer who had smirked during the initial briefing, took a step forward. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the grudging admiration of a man unaccustomed to giving praise, "I've been in birds that barely held together under half those conditions. You didn't just keep us alive. You made it look easy." Emily met his gaze and offered a polite nod. "It's never easy," she said. "It's just training, discipline, and trust in the crew." Jason stepped down from the cockpit, wiping sweat from his brow. "Don't let her fool you," he said with a grin. "That was pure skill. I've flown with combat vets who'd have lost their lunch 5 minutes in." Laughter rippled through the group, a low, appreciative sound that eased the tension lingering on the pad. Even Rourke's stern face softened slightly. "You know," the commander said, turning to address both the SEALs and the ground crew. Earlier tonight, I asked if there were any combat pilots here. I wasn't expecting a volunteer like Captain Hayes. I thought maybe I'd get a hand from one of our regular Rotary guys. What I got? He gestured toward Emily, his eyes scanning the crowd. What I got was the best pilot I've seen in years. And she just raised the bar for every man and woman in this unit. The words hung in the night air, heavier than the fading rotor wash. Around them, the base crew exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement, others simply staring at Emily, as if seeing her for the first time. Emily's cheeks warmed slightly, but her expression remained composed. Compliments were never the goal. The mission was. "We are all part of the success, sir," she said. "My crew chief, my co-pilot, your operators, they made the extraction possible." Rourke studied her for another long moment, then offered his hand. "Humility on top of skill," he said. "Damn rare combination." Emily accepted the handshake firmly. "We trained to bring everyone home," she replied. "That's the only standard that matters." Behind her, Jason leaned toward one of the SEALs and whispered, "Told you she was the real deal." The operator chuckled, shaking his head. As the adrenaline faded, the night grew quieter. The distant hum of other aircraft became the only sound, blending with the soft chirp of crickets beyond the perimeter fence. Floodlights bathed the landing pad in a cold white glow, but the air between the team felt warmer, charged with a shared respect that didn't need further explanation. Commander Rourke finally broke the silence with a practical nod. "Debrief in 20, he said, his voice returning to its usual command cadence. "Get your gear stowed and grab some water. And somebody get Captain Hayes the strongest coffee we have on base." "She's earned it." A ripple of subdued laughter followed, but no one argued. The SEALs began to disperse toward the hangar, their footsteps echoing across the concrete. Each one offered Emily a nod, a quiet salute, or a simple "ma'am" as they passed. None of them needed to say more. Jason lingered at her side as the pad emptied. "Not bad for a night's work," he said with a lopsided grin. Emily looked out toward the dark horizon, where the forest ridges disappeared into shadow. "It's never about the night," she said softly. "It's about getting everyone back to see the morning." Jason followed her gaze, his grin fading into a thoughtful smile. "And you just made sure they will." Emily slipped her helmet under her arm and started toward the hangar. Behind her, the Pave Hawk sat silent and gleaming under the floodlights. A machine that had been an extension of her will, now at rest. The mission was complete, but the lesson lingered in every mind on that landing pad: skill knows no gender. Courage needs no announcement, and respect is earned in the quiet precision of those who simply get the job done. As she walked away, the SEAL captain watched her go, a faint but unmistakable smile tugging at the edges of his battle-hardened face. For once, he didn't need to say a word. The silence said everything.